by the blood of our people are your lands kept safe.
I see in your eyes the same fear that will take the heart of me.
So do all who live to see such times.
By all that you hold dear, this good earth.
There's some good in this world, and it's worth fighting.
Welcome back, everyone. We are, of course, talking about the Rings of Power once again. Yes, the show, Season 1, has wrapped up, but that still hasn't stopped the internet and us from talking about it. So this one comes to us from Reddit, and they spotted a massive plot hole from Halbrand's perspective. We have touched on this, but I guess we can go into a little bit more detail here, and we can maybe try to correct it, or maybe we agree. So the plot hole that is being outlined here is one in which the Southlanders seem to accept that Halbrand is their king, despite the audience finding out an episode later that the line of kings in the Southlands had ended. And so the question is, why are these people in the Southland so willing to accept some random guy as a king if they should know that they don't have a king anymore? There's no more. There is no more people to take the king's place, at least from that line of succession. So, this one is a bit tricky. I actually kind of think it's a good spot by these guys on Reddit. Like I said, we've talked about this before, but I think this is one that it's just a huge oversight. It's a very weird reaction. Like, they even set that scene up. They didn't have to do it like that. They literally could have just had us go from that battle without showcasing Halbrand as the king to those people because he's injured, and we could just bring him directly to the elves. But they actually have an entire scene where they're like, "Here is your king," and everyone's like, "Yay, the king's back!" And they even cheer him as he rides off. So, why put that in if you're gonna then say there is no king?
That would have been that could have been the revelation moment. That would have been an epic revelation moment, wouldn't it?
Right.
If Bronwyn's just tells Galadriel, "Wait a second. There is no king in the Southlands."
or after the fact, so they don't meet Halbrand yet because there's a big battle, and Halbrand's so injured that they have to leave right away. I know, I still don't like the whole he rides a horse all the way to the elves and he's injured. I still don't like that. But even if we go with that, you can then have an interesting scene just before you reveal it with Galadriel. You can actually have it revealed somewhat in the Southlands. Have a scene where they're like, "Who was that guy? Oh, that was your king. We don't have a king." And then,
but Galadriel's already gone.
But Galadriel's already gone, and there's no way to reach her. So that is actually a much better storytelling style. And so they have this big ceremony for him, and it just doesn't make sense. And here's the one where I'm kind of on board with Reddit here. It's kind of weird, and they went out of their way to make this plot hole happen. They didn't even have to include it.
Yeah, they could. It's a good point. And this one reply is, because the Southlanders don't have records, they only have oral history, and have a mythic desire for a return to greatness. Many, many nations and peoples have traditional myths where one day their hero will return in their time of need to return them to greatness. King Arthur, Constantine the 13th, etc.
Yeah. One thing that I think you brought up before was that perhaps the records that the elves keep are incorrect.
That's what I mean. That seems more likely to me. Yeah. Like the elves may just not care, or whatever.
They just weren't able to get that information. I mean, they were in a battle.
Or you think it also doesn't really make sense because you would think Arondir, who's and that outpost, their mission's keeping tabs on the humans.
That's right.
So how would they not know that?
Yeah.
Even Rowan said that to Arondir in that first episode. One day our king will return.
That's right. And so, like, I guess this person's trying to say, well, the reason they're not confused is the people themselves don't realize the line was broken.
Yeah, but how come Arondir and the elves haven't looked into this king guy that that people keep mentioning is going to return one day?
Yeah, it's kind of weird that, so they were sent to watch over this region without, they weren't given enough information, and even Galadriel has to kind of go and figure out whether or not the Southland's king, the line of succession, was broken. I would have thought she would know that already too, just because she is so eager to track down all those who were either Sauron himself or any of his followers. The fact that she doesn't even know that the king of the Southlands, there is no more king, the line was broken. So it's kind of weird that the fact that nobody seemed to even care if there was still a king somewhere out there in the world for the Southlands. And it's kind of like the whole, like, I mean, it's not, there's a huge difference in terms of Aragorn's story, but that kind of has a similar feel to it when you look at the end of Lord of the Rings in the books, and all of a sudden you're talking to these people in Bree, and they're like, you mean that guy was the king all along? That guy that came in and had a beer at my in my little bar here, he's the king? And so it's got that kind of vibe to it, but it just doesn't seem to work in Rings of Power, whereas in Tolkien's Lord of the Rings, it does work because he's been doing his best to keep it a secret. And if you actually look into Aragorn's history, he actually has traveled all over the place trying to not, like, pretend he's not Aragorn, and he pretends to be somebody else, and he just becomes a regular soldier in a bunch of armies, and he fights with Rohan and with Gondor. So he's been trying to keep this a secret, and people know there is a king out there, and they just don't know where he is. Whereas here, they don't know that their line is broken. So it's got a bit of a different vibe, because they should at least know that the last king that they had didn't have an heir and died, and that's where it gets kind of weird. Mm-hmm. So, I'm okay to let this one slide as long as the show can really get into a groove in season 2, because plot holes happen in all sorts of great movies. You can just look to, like, Back to the Future, for example, for some awesome plot holes that you don't care at the end of the day because it's such a good film. So I'm okay with this one, just because, like, we've kind of given it a little bit of an explanation. Like, people don't always know who their king is. Elves could be wrong about their stuff. They might have had some misconceptions. So maybe going in, they thought they knew that the king was potentially still out there, and no one had looked deep enough into the records to see that it was broken. Maybe they were told the wrong information by their commanding officer.
But I mean, I was also we were also saying that, I mean, this was 1,000 years ago, which isn't that long ago for elves. Like,
no,
the guy who wrote that scroll is probably still kicking around.
He still works in the library.
So I mean, it's
so you're right. With the elves involved, it complicates it. You're right, because with humans, you could easily see why we would lose track of who should be king. I mean, heck, if you can look to real life British royalty, some people argue that that's not the rightful queen, or I guess king now. But you're right, with the elves, the fact that the guy who wrote it is probably still alive and still young for an elf, that's where it gets weird. And I'm with you on that. The elves complicate things so much because their time span, it allows them to essentially have been there for a bunch of points in history, so they shouldn't need to look things up.
I mean, those should even, like, have a living memory of, that guy died. The last king of the Southlands died.
They, like, somebody should remember, like, seeing it happen, like, being their first-hand accounts. There's no need to look into history books. You just go and talk to your friend who was there. We kind of have scenes like that in the trilogy where Elrond is like, I was there, and it's like, oh, so you can show us how to get to Mordor then, because you've been there.
No.
No, I'm sure you guys do just fine. But no, like because he's there, he can literally say firsthand account. I saw exactly what happened. I don't have to read about it. So that the elves definitely complicate things, but I'm willing to let this one go, and I'm okay kind of with chalking it up to the elves just losing sight of that fact while so much stuff was going on. It's still a bit weird, but I'm willing to let it slide. How about you?
I guess we have no choice but to let it slide.
Fair enough. Well, all I'm saying is, like, if the show can just kind of pick up and get into a really solid groove in season 2, I think this just gets kind of forgotten. Like, I personally think it was just a bad scene to include, and you can kind of forget that one scene exists.
But there were better ways to write this.
There was definitely better ways to write this, no doubt.
Wait a second, we don't have a king. What are you talking
Yeah.
about, Muriel? And then the freaking volcano goes off.
Yeah. Oh no, that'd be cool
They've already
too.
left.
That'd be cool too. And then we don't even need. Well, see, the thing is, they really wanted him to go all the way to the elves, make some rings, and then ditch. So he goes from Mordor all the way to meet Celebrimbor, makes some rings with the elves, and then goes all the way back on foot.
And as we discussed earlier, he simply does walk into Mordor.
Yeah, Boromir is just really mad right now. But anyway, let us know in the comments below, does this plot hole bother you? I know it's definitely going to bother some people, but are you willing to let this slide if the show can kind of pick up and get into a really solid groove? Or is this one always going to be hanging over its head as just a damning plot hole that you can't forgive?